to you. You're listening to the Music Business Buddy with me, Johnny Amos, podcasting out of Birmingham in England. I am the author of the book, The Music Business for Music Creators, available in hardback, paperback and ebook format. I am a music creator with credits on a variety of major and indie labels as a writer-producer, and I'm a senior lecturer in music business and music creation. Wherever you are, whatever you do, consider yourself welcome to this podcast and to a part of the community around it. I'm here to try and educate and inspire music creators from all over the world in their quest to achieving their goals by gaining a greater understanding of the business of music. Okay, so in today's episode, I am interviewing Gary Charles. Gary is an interdisciplinary artist and music producer, exhibiting work including moving image, sound art and performance. Alongside extensive recording, mixing and mastering experience, Gary is also a senior lecturer in music production and has composed sound and music for artists, film, theatre, contemporary dance productions and many other things. Another facet of Gary's career, which is particularly interesting, and something I'll be asking him about today, is that he is an associate practitioner of the Sonic Art Research Unit at Oxford Brookes University and is currently undertaking his PhD research looking into the impact of artificial intelligence on creative practice and cultural production. So let's get into it. Gary Charles, welcome to the Music Business Buddy. It's good to have you here. Thank you for being here. How are you, mate?
I'm great. Thanks for inviting me. I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad you're here. Right. There's so many things we can talk about, Gary, but let's start with you as a music creator, right? So some people will know you as the Static Hand, other people will know you as the guy from Low Red Moon, others will know you from your work with Spectral Karaoke. But being a creator and a producer defines you and your music career. It sums up you as to all the other things that you've done since and before. That it defines you, right? So how has your creativity evolved during your career so far?
I started out really in post-punk indie type bands as a teenager. I grew up in late apartheid South Africa, where I guess they were more interested in teaching you how to shoot a gun than play a guitar or play the piano. And so I never had a musical education. I don't come from a musical family or anything like that. It really just came from being really into the music and started getting involved in different projects. I couldn't play an instrument. I still today can't play any specific instrument particularly well. I mean, on all of my records, there's keys, synthesizers, guitars, bass that I play, but I'm not sort of classically trained at any of those things.
That's very modest, Gary.
So I mean I sort of, every time I've tried to also learn in the classical sense, there's a little trigger in me that says, no, you just want to go and make some noise. So I tend to approach most musical instruments very, I guess, unmusically and start to use them as sound making tools rather than thinking about notes or chord structures, which is just something that is kind of the way that I've worked. So I've tended
That's
up
quite
to...
punk in itself, though, actually, isn't it? That's
Well, or it could be just laziness.
no, it's definitely not laziness. I know you're not lazy.
So I was in sort of post-punk indie. We were into sort of I guess artists like the Stone Roses, Happy Mondays, also I guess a bit of Cure, Susie and the Banshees, the Fall, bands like that, which in sort of early 90s South Africa, there was not many people. You couldn't really hear any of that stuff on the radio. But one of the guitarists that I was playing in a band with, his brother had a basic recording setup at home, and he also had a sort of one of those old, really kind of basic Alesis drum machines. And so I
right. They were great, those things.
started programming programming those and really enjoying it. And he also had a I can't remember what synth he had. It was sort of one of the Nord type synths. So I started kind of playing with that and really kind of getting into the recording process as well. So we were talking a little bit earlier about the Porta Studio cassette
Oh yeah.
recorders. So I got one of those,
We
and
should have recorded that. Never
yeah,
mind.
I love those sort of old 4-track cassette recorders.
Yeah,
Um,
you can still find them as well when you look for them on eBay.
and you pay a fortune,
Yeah.
especially the ones with the sort of pitch control or the time
Oh, right.
tempo
Okay.
control. Yeah, they're
Yeah, they're
great.
harder to find.
Yeah, you can almost use them as an instrument in themselves.
Yeah.
Great. So and at the same time I started getting into more electronic music, so things like Aphex Twin or techno, um uh yeah, some of the, I guess, when the Flying Lotus and the sort of LA beat scene started becoming prominent, I was kind of really into that. So started becoming more electronic focused. Also recording some demos for other local bands, and so really kind of started getting into the production side, I guess, the recording and engineering and production side, but entirely self-taught. And I didn't have any money, so it was kind of like um teaching and scrabbling around for whatever we can, get our hands on. And then um, I decided after studying, actually, I studied law because I kind of was one of the
Really?
first, yeah,
Wow.
which was, I never wanted to be a lawyer, but it was kind of one of the most rewarding things, because it was at a time when the constitution was changing in South Africa, so to just
Ah,
become a democratic country. And a lot of my professors were the advisors to the ANC in building this new constitution for a new country. So it was
wow.
really a fascinating and wonderful time to be studying law. So I kind of sat in some of the early constitutional court sessions where they overturned capital punishment and all big sort of
Wow.
decisions like that. So that
That's
was really
huge.
that
You would
was
have,
really
wow.
really
That's amazing.
fascinating, and it was kind of a privilege to actually, and a lot of my old professors are still very active today. So for example, John Dugard, who was my international law professor, he was recently the head of the team that brought the case to the South African case to the ICJ, to the International Court of Justice. Um, so it's kind of, a lot of these people, even though I was just there as a student, of it's kind of stayed, I think, really, yeah, really important for me. But at the same time, I was kind of playing in bands and wanting to get deeper and deeper into music. And I decided to come back to the UK. But in the meantime, what I did was um, take a couple of months off and spend every penny that I'd saved up, and I took 2 months to just learn how to. So I'd already had a sort of, I guess, cracked version of early Logic when it was still PC and Mac.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Well, eMagic. Gosh, I'm showing my age
Oh,
now,
right.
but
Wow.
yeah.
Okay. Geesh.
And then I got Reason, the first edition of Reason, which had when you flipped the panel, it had all of the cabling.
Yes, I
So it
remember
was
that.
like a virtual analog where you had to plug everything into the mixer.
Yes. Did you ever
And
like hit the tab button really quickly and try and make the cable shake a bit more?
yeah,
I...
it's great. and it was just such a with for somebody who didn't have access to studios and any of the equipment. It was such a brilliant way to learn, and so I kind of
Yeah.
learnt first in the virtual world, in the early versions of Reason. So I mean, and then eventually I started using Ableton, also Ableton One, the very first.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
Wow.
I'm that old.
Crikey, you've paid your dues, man.
So anyway, um really learning all along, and then started doing making some stuff on my own as a solo artist. So the Static Hand is probably the sort of project that's been the longest standing and has been around for a while. But I've released music, all sorts of weird and wonderful things, some of which I wouldn't probably stand by today or want to listen to, but under all sorts of different names. But mainly more focused on sort of ambient experimental electronic, and then some of the projects were sort of more, I guess, dance floor focused. um Returned to the UK for a while, um and then moved to Berlin. So well, in lived in London, and my partner at the time, who's now my wife, got accepted to the Royal Academy, and she's South African. Got accepted to the Royal Academy of Art to study fine art. So we kind of made a pact, that I'd still go and work and do mundane office jobs to kind of get us through the 3 years, and then after that we will both just be artists, musicians, and go find somewhere that's affordable to live, which we did, and we went to Berlin. And so then I became much more kind of involved in the sort of techno, um, electronica kind of scene. Um, was in a I guess electro punk uh, group for a short while with um, which was a sort of a short-lived project, but quite fun. And then also started mixing and mastering tracks for essentially for DJs who because the club scene was kind of huge there, and there were lots of DJs who were looking to learn how to produce and to get their records to sound good, not so much on CD or at home listening, but on the club sound system where they were
Oh,
where they were DJing, and in most cases were resident uh, DJs. So I kind of got involved in that. I had a little studio in the old communist East German National Broadcasting Center,
wow.
the Funkhaus.
Really? Good
Yeah,
God, I've read about that. Wow.
which was just great. So my wife had a large painting studio downstairs, and I had a small little recording and mixing and mastering space. I also started then teaching, which was really new for me, and generally teaching DJs who were wanted to learn how to produce. So I'd kind of be with them all the way through, kind of creating their first sort of their first records, and trying to help them make sure that it sounded the way that they wanted to sound on in their sets, and that was just really good fun. And at the same time I was releasing um uh you know under the different projects that I was working on, releasing releasing tracks. Did a bit of remix work for Florian Meindl, who was kind of a fairly well known tech house. I mean, all of the scenes that I'd been involved in it up until this time, or always really, were kind of underground, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
Kind of
But
underground niche.
But which is where things are at again now, right?
Yeah,
With Discord servers and communities and micro genres and I mean, I mean that's a lot of different scenes as well that you've
yeah,
been a part of, Gary. That's a lot of different cultures and styles all kind of mixed in. I mean, you've done stuff for film and theatre and contemporary dance productions, so
yeah.
you've done all sorts of different things. Is it is is AI a part of your workflow now? Is it integrated into the way that you do things now?
So the AI thing really came about um, through through fascination with technology, firstly, and then uh, I'd done when we came back to the UK. I did a master's at Oxford Brookes at there in sound art because I'd started doing sort of sound art installations,
Yeah,
artist films,
yeah.
and sort of more focused on the sort of, I guess, the art school world rather than the typical music and music industry kind of world. And I decided to do a PhD, and at the time I was starting to work with early machine learning models. Um, at that point in time, if you said to anyone, "Oh, well, I'm going to do something in AI," people didn't really have a clue what you're talking about. And now, flash forward sort of 6 years, 7 years later, and it's kind of everywhere. And I'm still busy doing my doing my PhD on it, which presents a number of challenges, but um, it started out where I was incorporating AI early sort of MIDI generation models, some the kind of early audio short clips of audio generation models, and I started out using them and incorporating them into my practice and into the work I was doing. But the more and more I got into or delved into this world, the more my sort of thesis became a critique of what is happening and the emergence of AI, not just in music, kind of in general. So, and um, I've done a few sort of um, multidisciplinary projects, I guess you'd call them, um, kind of looking at that. So
Wow.
the the last one is the last one that so we were invited to do a residency in South Africa. So myself and my partner, my wife, who's a visual artist mainly, but then also we worked with a South African poet and playwright and a who's Napo Mashiani, and then Tulisile, who's um, a dancer, a performance artist. And for each of the disciplines, I guess you'd say we worked with the latest sort of AI model to interact with them and kind of try and break them. Essentially, that's what my practice with AI has been, trying to
Right.
break
Okay.
the models at the time and see kind of how they work and understand them. And in working in South Africa is really interesting from that point of view because, of course, the training sets for um, even for the sort of very large language models like ChatGPT um, are really based on scraped information from the internet and are therefore heavily Western biased. So scraped English content from the internet, heavily Western biased, heavily US and US and European biased. So when you're working with things like, so for example, one of the first um, AI models that really kind of, I guess, passed or could be seen as passing the Turing test of convincing somebody that it was actually the work of a professional human, was Deep Bach, which was a model trained on the Bach chorales.
Right.
And if um, if played to a non-trained listener, so a layperson, they heard one of the Bach chorales generated by this AI model. Essentially, it took all, and of course, the Bach chorales already have a pattern and an algorithm that was embedded um, in the music, and so people wouldn't be able to tell which was an original Bach chorale and um, which was AI generated.
Right. Okay. Now, Gary, that right there is the problem, isn't it, for a lot of people, especially, rights holders in the music business, right?
Yeah.
Is that like, this is great, but what's it learning from? And if we know what it's learning from, it's like, why isn't that remunerated? How can it be remunerated? There's a lot of questions around that we don't have the answers to yet as time ticks on. But in many ways, language models are kind of the way that they scrape there, right? It's
Yeah.
like I'd never thought about the bias aspect of it before, right? But of course, it's bias, isn't it? If it's just web scraping and running paradigmatic analysis,
Well,
text analysis, and
in
looking for patterns.
music, it gets even in music. I think it gets even more um, complex when you think about the from a music industry or Western popular music point of view. The first question we have, and kind of quite rightly, is what's in the training set. Do, what do the copyright holders have, and do the copyright holders get remunerated? And that sort of we've been here before with things like Muzak and with Napster, where we're kind of trying to uncover these things. But and that's an area that I'm obviously super interested in, but um like I kind of zoom out and see a slightly different problem, because if we manage to get that um that resolved, which there's big court cases between the major labels and Udio and Suno, the prominent AI generators at the moment, and so it can appear that that's kind of maybe going to be resolved. But when you think about, say uh, Amapiano
Yeah, yeah.
or Tom music, something that's very culturally embedded in a location, where in South Africa, if you're a young or Amapiano producer, you'll be creating tracks, usually in your bedroom with a cracked version of FL Studio or Ableton or whatever you can get your hands on. And that music is really, even in South Africa, a lot of the kind of genres of music emerge from certain regions, um, and they're very culturally embedded. What are we saying if we say, well, actually we've solved the problem of AI and copyright because we've had the court cases, the major labels have done a deal that they'll say is protecting artists. And then we say, okay, that's solved. So now we can create I'm a piano generator. Um, so so then you've got the Silicon Valley monopolies and the music industry monopolies kind of colluding to essentially appropriate the entire cultural underpinning of of a music that's very embedded in communities or in locations. And
Mm,
so then suddenly you'll have um yeah a Silicon Valley tech startup, kind of um which is reliant on the infrastructure that is essentially monopolistic for um chipsets. So at the
right.
risk of getting sort of mundane, but in order to train a model, you need not the CPUs that are in your computer, but a graphic processing unit. And really the hardware itself is already a monopoly. So which is why NVIDIA has become one of the world's largest companies over the last 5-10 years, as opposed to just being a producer of high-end graphic processing units for video gamers. They're now the processing unit for all of the servers that are used to train AI models.
Oh.
So basically, the entire infrastructure is a monopoly, and if we accept that, okay, we're fine that copyright holders will be remunerated in places like South Africa, or if you think of Buy Funk in Brazil, or anywhere where there's kind of musical innovation happening, and that can easily be just transported across, and there's not really as well established copyright holding function in those countries. So for example, in South Africa, if you've made your track, usually what you'll do is put it on a USB stick, or well, these days send it off to taxi owners, and the taxis that transport people to work every day are one of the places where people hear music. And where so for example, here in if we think of kind of Amapiano and Tom, they're kind of often seen as niche exotic types of music. So for example, I saw Sho Majosi, who's in South Africa, she's a pop star. She's like the South African Beyonce. But when she's playing in Europe, so I saw her at the CTM festival, which is like a underground electronic type festival in Germany. So these types of music are seen as kind of niche, and and there's not much copyright going on. But then what we're saying is that that entire cultural lineage is open to just being imputed into a model. And I think that's where I kind of have the the concern, or the area that I kind of like to look at. And then in the language models in ChatGPT, I mean, even today, sort of if you kind of try and invoke cultural references from American or British popular culture, it's usually got a lot of information to draw on. But if you start kind of questioning about the life of a contemporary a Sesotho person living in Johannesburg, it really doesn't have any of that context, and it kind of ends up drawing on stereotypes from sort of Western culture. So for like it's kind of wild, the like DALL-E and Midjourney, the image generating models, even today, if you kind of ask it to give you an image of a wealthy Zulu banker, for example, it'll often, and their home, it'll often show a man in a suit outside a sort of mud hut, or kind of a so it's still got those stereotypes and biases deeply embedded in the training sets.
So it's looking through a westernized lens.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what this is a really, really, really interesting subject, Gary. Thank you for bringing it up. I appreciate it. I mean, um, one of the things that's at the top of the agenda for AI is what I mentioned earlier, right? Rights holders,
Yeah.
etc. And there may well be a path to stabilizing that at some point. But what you've raised is a is another ethical problem. So let me um, let me phrase it this way. Let's frame it in this sense, right?
Mm.
If let's take Amapiano for example, right? If we've got say five or six artists that it's Amapiano, it's from originates from West Africa, right? Ghana, Nigeria, or
No, no, from South Africa, and
does
actually,
it?
yeah, and even within South
Oh, sorry.
Africa,
Hmm.
there's sort of contention of where the lineage, because
Ah,
you obviously had Kwaito post apartheid South Africa. Kwaito was very popular sort of dance pop music, and then you had a lot of genres springing out, and in Pretoria, and now Pretoria, to give you a sense of even how local some of these discussions can be. Pretoria is, I think, 30 odd miles from Johannesburg, but Pretoria, there's a genre called Bacardi House that was very popular, and that emerged there. And the Pretoria folks will tell you that Amapiano is from Pretoria, and Joburg folks will tell you that Amapiano is actually from Joburg and comes from a slightly different lineage. So even
oh,
within South Africa, there's a regional dispute, and Kom, for example,
oh yeah.
is from um, Natal, and sort of,
Oh,
and so even within South Africa, you have these regional disputes. But then when we're looking at these kind of genres, and they all have a regional and a cultural lineage that kind of that goes back through those, and and that's kind of invisible. That context is sort of invisible to us. So that in fact we get, kind of the um idea that kind of Africa is just this one place creating
I know.
creating music, whereas it's kind of um hugely
Hmm.
multifaceted, and which also leads me to another kind of challenge with AI um recreation or reproduction. If we also get used to the fact that and accept the fact that AI, this technology, is so well developed that it can create passable, let's say, I'm a piano, and then we can produce that music at scale. Always, that's looking back.
Yeah.
We're just reproducing the past, because every time a training model or a model is trained, it's only got historic information, and then we kind of reduce the ability for new innovation. So that
Hmm.
like organic shift from Kwaito to Kom to Shangaan Electro to all of these regional takes that emerge. If at the point, let's say 1999, we say we build a model now of South African pop music, and it's Kwaito, and we can generate Kwaito for days, then would all of these new genres or new modes of music making have emerged, or have strongly emerged? So it's a
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, and especially in a world where you could take a producer who could sit in, I don't know, um, on his laptop in Peru, right?
Mm,
And pull in, let's say, some Amapiano logarithms, right? And
mm,
then combine that with, let's say, a Norwegian folk rhythm, and pull that together. And then all of a sudden, the scene starts where he or she or they are based, and all of a sudden, it becomes basically a fusion of everything that's come
mm.
before. That's a good example of AI, isn't it? It's like it is pulling everything from the past, but the pieces, when collected, might build something new. I don't know. Am I looking at it too positively? Tell me.
Well, I mean, the thing I always kind of, because we already do that, right? Like, so
Mm,
to some extent, but to for that to be interesting, I would argue it needs a cultural movement around it. So these things are not simply embedded in the notes and the notes and the rhythms. They can't they can't be uh they can't be kind of encoded easily. So for example, um when these kind of uh movements happen, they're usually based around a region, sometimes individual clubs. Think of techno
mm.
in Germany with Berghain. Think of house music comes from the name of a place, a club
Yeah.
in Chicago. So scenes and cultures aren't just the music and the notes that are played. I mean, I always think of Voodoo Ray, a guy called Gerald. So it just embedded in that music. So it makes you think of sort of post Thatcher Britain, the hacienda, uh, the technology. So the cheap 303, 808 that
Mm.
were kind of uh, classified as a complete, you know, um, failure, and these are suddenly
Yeah.
making the biggest sounds. And obviously you think of ecstasy, you think of acid house. So all of these cultural connections that are brought to bear on one piece of music, if that sits in a training set, all that we have is the 48,000 digital samples per second. So that entire cultural context gets stripped away from from the music. And so if we see
Yes.
music as simply the notes and maybe this is a grand way of me justifying not learning not learning how to play the piano properly. but 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 if we start to reduce music to we're just creating a commodity, I think it's deeply problematic. And the logics behind AI generation I see as kind of that logic on hyperspeed. Like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
aim of music is just to create this WAV file, and really then that removes all of the sort of musicking people. Music is a social action. Music is a cultural action. Ooh, just dropped my phone. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
I was getting a little bit um
It started dancing.
amplified. Yes.
Did it?
I
It's
was just
good.
about to get up and start toying.
But these
um,
are there's some really, really,
yeah.
really good points here, especially if we kind of, let's take a couple of examples, right? First off, if you take a tradition that, let's say, is difficult to actually say where it's from. You mentioned about Amapiano and the different arguments around that, for example. So if something disappears into the mists of time, at what point do we start to regulate its foundation? And then what does that look like when it is learned from? So if we split into two categories and we go, right, one's timbre and one's
Yeah.
mathematics, right? One's patterns and one's
Yes.
timbre, then we get somewhere, don't we? Because we can say, well, we can take this particular rhythm from that particular area of South Africa. But if we do it in MIDI and we apply it to, I don't know, a Nashville Gretsch kit,
Yeah.
then we've got something which is a hybrid. It could be argued that that's not new, but it does come from somewhere that should be
Yes.
respected. But on the other hand, if we're just taking the timbres and sampling them and using them differently, again, that becomes something new, but based solely on the origins of that original source.
Yeah.
So there's that side. Okay, let's think about this one then, Gary, right? You mentioned about playing piano there, right? Going from I'm a piano to piano. Now, okay, now some people get really they don't like it when I talk about these things, right? But so I don't mean to annoy anybody, but if we take out the wholesome aspects of playing an instrument and we
Yeah.
just think about it for the purpose that it is to record and perform, right? Or let's just put recorded music under the microscope for a minute. If you didn't know how to play the piano, that doesn't mean you obviously you can't have piano on your record. Somebody else could play it. We know this, that's been around for hundreds of years. However, if you were to be able to play piano and you wanted to record that onto a song that you were creating, it's going to be a little bit biased on some level, right? Because it's you and you like it because it's you playing it, and that's okay because that's where art comes from. However, there's a limit to what you might feel on that particular day, how you're conditioned, how tired you are, etc. But if you're generating patterns on that piano, on whichever piano, let's say it's a contact instrument or whatever, and you just keep generating patterns, the thing that dictates whether you keep it or not is the decision that you make where you say, that's the part I'm going to use it. Now, it could be that actually that yields, and for many it already does yield a far greater result than having played that instrument in the first place, which is what I mean about offending those that are wholesome instrument players, for which I am one, right? With guitar, I've played guitar for like 30 years, something, but very often I choose samples because it's quicker to work
Yeah.
with. Shoot me down, I'm sorry. So, it's
I
like,
think you're in very good company with
yeah, I think I am. I just don't want to offend any listeners, but it's a thing. It's here, but it's like when we really, really break it down, it's like it's laden with innocence in many ways.
yeah.
Because if we were to take a particular sound on Splice and say, right, let's put that in my sampler and build something with it, it's like we should be upon ourselves to understand where that came from. But it's difficult to know. I mean, that's we can't regulate that, can we? But how do we like if we take a genre, for example, like one of the ones from South Africa that you mentioned, that you go, right, yeah, if we are doing something unethical here by taking a genre, if that genre had sort of 5 or 6 sort of flagship artists, the manner that we worked at in terms of copyright collection would work, wouldn't it? Because we'd be able to say, right, those 5 or 6 producers or creators of music are synonymously linked with that style, and we can use that to train the model that we're going to use to recreate it. In which case, we can remunerate those 5 or 6 people, but not the genre or the
Yeah.
place
Yeah.
it came from, right? So then it does work. So then it's like, well, the argument we could become, well, we can train a model to understand Queen,
Yeah.
the band, but we're not taking into consideration the origins of where they took their influences from. It's like, where does it stop? You know what I
Well,
mean?
the way that I sort of see it, and this is not just an AI problem, but it's um, I suppose a capital problem. I mean, the music industry, the popular music industry, or the industry with a capital I, is already a monopoly,
Hmm.
and I think that's problematic. So in that scenario, um, the AI industry, all the way from the infrastructure that is used, um, is a monopoly or a monopolistic, um, and so the challenge with that is you've got everything controlled by very few hands, so that ability for younger or somebody doing something interesting and new to come through becomes becomes reduced, which is already to some extent the case. Um, seeing it from a seeing it, I guess, from a positive perspective, and I mean this is a challenge that that there's a lot of work being done with Spotify. Spotify, as you know, is um, part owned by the large record labels, in a reaction to and in a reaction to the threat of Napster and peer-to-peer pirating at the time. That was done to make sure that the 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 major labels would tell you it was in order to protect the artists, but the major labels get a minimum value per month from Spotify regardless, and our shareholders. So that whole system is really designed to to control the entire industry. So from that perspective, I think the music industry as a whole is is problematic from my lens, just from the point of view that it's so monopolistic. But then interacting with another monopolistic system, the tech universe, uh, I don't see how much good can come of it. I don't really know what to do about it, or what. I mean, I guess from my perspective, the approach is to try and instill in 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 people the joy of community musicking together, community building, and culture building. Um, but it is kind of a challenge if you are wanting to make music your career, because
Yeah.
then
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you. That's what I wanted to finish off with, was that question, right? Was that like, what's the advice that you could give to emergent music composers and producers in regard to their relationship with AI?
the weird thing is, and maybe to leave it on a, I don't know if it's a positive, but an interesting an interesting personal kind of take. I mean, as I mentioned, most of the music making that I've been involved in has been kind of in niche scenes, and I've always sort of ignored pop music as uninteresting or not for me. Um, but more recently, I've become much more fascinated with pop music production, and I think it relates to the AI, and there's a number of reasons for it. Working with some of the students who are so super talented and are making their way in this world, and are really gifted pop songwriters, producers. That's kind of um, got me a bit more interested. But also, I think the weirder things are coming through pop music production, and I do think it's related to AI in the sense that um, if AI, and not just AI, even sort of the immense amount of tools we have that allow us to do everything in key, to quantize every bit of information, to sing key, to essentially it's easier to make music that's right than music that's wrong at the moment. And
Mm,
and in if you know how to use the tools. Um, and in that world where it's easy to reproduce the generic, then maybe the slightly weirder become popular. So I mean, for example, um, uh, the Charlie XCX record, A.G. Cook, the producer, comes from um, a real sort of left field underground scene. He started PC music. He did a degree in music computing, or in computing at Goldsmiths. So really a really interesting producer, and has produced probably the record that's going to win the Grammy for the best pop record for last
ah,
year.
that's
And then
interesting.
you
Okay.
got somebody like Lewis Roberts, who produced the FKA Twigs record. He releases music as chorus, really interesting um dance music without beats, with one of the one of the terms that people talk about him. But so people with interesting takes and doing new things are more involved in the pop world.
Yeah.
So so that's kind of fascinating to me, and I
Yeah.
hope that we see more of that.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
we probably will.
And it all creates more learning, right? More learning that can be trained. No, that's fascinating. No, it's I've said it before on this podcast, though, Gary. Sometimes the questions are more interesting than the answers, right? It's
Of
just good.
course.
It's
Oh,
good
that
for us to talk about this. Your insight on this, Gary, well, on many, many things, is fascinating, and I really, really am grateful to you for coming on here and talking about your background, about all these different things that you've been through musically, and how it informs you to talk about AI and its role, and especially some of the ethical values that don't get talked about as much when it comes to AI. So, thank you for being here, mate. It's much, much, much appreciated.
it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Ah, what a super dude. Don't I get some lovely people on this podcast? I don't mean that as a big up to myself. I just mean there's so many great people, isn't there, in this world and in this industry. And I can't even begin to explain how much I learn from just not talking to them, but just listening to them, And Gary's a yet another example of that. I mean, he just has such a multi-dimensional perspective on things because he's lived through various music scenes in different parts of the world. And it just, it doesn't give him a purer soul, but it don't half make him more useful as a music creator. He's just so well informed, and I also, it's kind of nice to change, to switch up the subjects and the angles on AI a little bit, because it's very easy to just buy into the very kind of social media driven narratives on, oh, isn't this terrible? Or, oh, it's replacing humans, or, any of the nonsensical things which will prove to be probably rubbish in various years to come. And there's also the agendas that we hear on the business side of music, which I can understand in regards to, what are we going to do to remunerate rights holders? These are all good questions. There is a lot more to AI than just those things. And those are the things that, Gary kind of talked about here today. And it was really, really, really interesting. I hope you gained a lot out of it. Okay, I will see you again next time. Until then, may the force be with you.